The topic that I want to discuss with you is giving and contributions to the fund in the Baha'i faith. According to the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the most holy book of Baha'is, there are two passages that deal with this question. Passage 145, or verse 145, or 146, is what is called Zakat, which means giving and contributions for philanthropy and other things. That is recommended, was voluntary. The other passage, which is passage 97, is called Huquq or Huququllah. This is sort of a Baha'i taxation, which is obligatory. Nobody comes as a Baha'i to tell you that you have to pay this, but this is what is in the book, and there are usually a reminder once in a while, not to individuals, but in meetings, to tell us what this is all about. This is the passage in the Most Holy Book. Should anyone acquire 100 misqals of gold, 19 misqals, or 19% of it, therefore are God's, and to be rendered unto him. Then he goes on to say that by this means he hath desired to purify what you possess, and to enable you to draw nigh to such stations as none can comprehend, save those whom God hath willed. So in fact he's saying that God does not want our money, but this is the way to purify our funds, and for the faith to have a means for sustaining, to build a house of worship, to help the poor, to bring about the equity that this faith aspires for, and many other things. So this idea, this mandatory principle, which is called Huququllah, it's called the right of God. It's translated as the right of God. This short compilation, which is about 50 pages, is a compilation of basically all the essential writings by Baha'u'llah, mainly by Baha'u'llah, and then interpretations and explanations by Abdul Baha, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, the sole interpreter of the writings of Baha'u'llah, and then by Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, and ultimately a few passages by our universal house of justice, the authoritative universal body that can explain some of these writings if some of us have questions on them. Baha'u'llah explains that the dignity of the faith is so important that we should never go to an individual and ask him to give this money. If that individual understands the faith, understands his obligations, his spiritual obligations, he would do it voluntarily. Again, to indicate the importance of this law, Baha'u'llah in the passage says, O people, the first duty is to recognize the one true God. Of course, this is the first duty of anyone who is the member of any religion. The second is to show forth constancy in his cause, which means if you believe in this religion, you should believe in its tenets. You should believe, first and foremost, in the oneness of God, oneness of religion, and oneness of humanity. And then follow his teachings, his laws, whether it is on the question of marriage, on the question of prayers, fasting, and all the rest. And then he says his next duty, his third duty in effect, is to purify his riches and earthly possessions according to that which is prescribed by God. So this shows the importance of it. Knowing God, understanding the religion, and following his laws, including this important law of Huququllah, the right. It says, therefore it beseemeth thee to meet thine obligation to the right of God, then to direct thy steps toward the blessed house. Now this right of God, this Huququllah, is to be paid to the universal house of justice by all the believers whose income reaches a certain level, and I'll explain it. And this will be used by the universal house of justice as they see fit, for philanthropy, for orphans, for teaching, for building houses of worship, etc. Again, it is stated that anyone whose annual income is equivalent of 19 misqals of gold. It means around, at this time, around $2,400. Must pay 19% of it to the fund. And by this, does not mean gross income, but his net income, which is basically how much we can save in a year. 19% of it should go to the fund. Then he explains that one's residence, the house where he lives, and reasonable furnishings in the house are exempt from paying Huququllah. And then the tools that one needs for business are also exempt. Now, in case of one's death, the first obligation is to pay for the burial expenses of the person. The second obligation to pay all his debts. And for a Baha'i, the third obligation is to pay any unpaid Huququllah, any unpaid right of God. Now, one's home and furnishings and clothing goes to the eldest son, according to the laws of Baha'u'llah. But any remaining balance to the heirs will be subject to Huququllah. So those, the house and the rest that I indicated, they're not subject to paying Huququllah again. Now, what is considered to be reasonable expenses are left to the judgment of the individual. Baha'u'llah doesn't tell us how much is reasonable expense, but it says use your judgment. You know, how much income you have, you know, what you eat, you know, and then what you need for your furnishing. Keep it reasonable. Now, it is interesting that somebody with devout Baha'i approached Baha'u'llah and says that he wants to live very frugally so that he can pay a lot of Huququllah, so that his savings will be a lot and he'll pay a lot to Huququllah. Baha'u'llah's response is very interesting, and that shows that this is the faith of moderation. Baha'u'llah tells him that moderation in everything, including what we spend, is what I want you to do. So he doesn't want us to become stingy for ourselves, for our family, so that we'll pay a lot of Huququllah. No, he wants us to be reasonable and spend in moderation. Everything in moderation, according to him, is good. Now, the other thing is that he explains to us that contributions that we make to other funds, we pay to a local assembly, we make contributions to other funds for helping the poor and all the rest, they are not considered part of Huququllah. But then how we calculate it, he leaves it up to us. This means, do we calculate that money that we paid as part of our reasonable expenses, and then on the balance we say that's our saving on which we paid 19%? Or do we say that, okay, I have an income and that's my reasonable expense before I account for this additional contribution that I've made, and then I pay 19% of it? He leaves that up to us. Now, although this law, the law of Huququllah, was revealed in Baha'is most holy book, Aqdas, in 1873 when Baha'u'llah was the imprisoned city of Akka, but he did not make it effective until around 1878. It's interesting that from that time, 1878, until a couple of years ago, we had only 5 what we call main trustee of Huququllah, which means the first 2 were selected by Baha'u'llah himself, and he gave them a title. The first one, his title was Aminul Bayan. Amin means the trusted person. So he was the trustee of Huququllah from 1878 until 1881. The second one, who was very well known in the Baha'i faith, was called Haji Amin. And he was trustee of Huquq from 1881 to 1928. And he basically went to different cities and he collected this Huquq and sent it to the Holy Land. Now this was now not only during the time of Baha'u'llah, but up to the end of the life of Abu Baha, 1921, and the first few years of the reign of Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith. So the third one was selected by Shoghi Effendi at his time, and his title was Aminul Amin. His period of being trustee was 1928 until 1938. After him, a hand of the cause, whose name was Baliullah Varqa, became the trustee of Huququllah, and this was from 1938 until 1955, 2 years before Shoghi Effendi passed away. And then the last custodian of the trustee of Huququllah was another hand of the cause, a relative of Walid Varga, whose name was Ali Muhammad Varga. And then his time period was the longest, from 1955 to 2007. A period of what? 57 years he was Huququllah until he passed away. He was in charge of Huququllah. These funds, according to the law of Allah, are to be meticulously accounted for, so that the last penny that is paid for this particular mission should be accounted for, and the Universal Justice decides exactly how this money is to be spent to the last penny. This law was obligatory only for the Baha'is of Iran and then the Middle East. But then, in 1980s, the Universal Justice, sent the message to Baha'is of other lands. And then from 1992, centennial of the departure of Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892. So from 1992, it became the universal law, so that all Baha'is in the world who qualify to pay Huququllah, that's their obligation. I'm going to conclude this section with a couple of examples as to how Huququllah is to be calculated. And let me emphasize that this is my understanding of it. And for every one of us, we should go to the laws themselves, to the book that I mentioned. This amazing book in 50 pages, everything is explained. But of course, it needs more clarification in terms of calculations. So here is my brief explanation. Suppose that you have a home, and your home and furnishings is valued for $180,000. And you have other assets, which comes to a total of $50,000. So your total assets is $230,000. In accounting, we say assets is everything that we have. So everything we have is $230,000. Then we have 30,000 liabilities, which means what we owe to others, which is 30,000. So the rest is our net worth, what the balance of what we have is. Now, as I explained earlier, our house and furnishing is exempt from paying Huququllah, the right of God. So our house and furnishings was 180,000. So if we subtract this 180,000, the balance is 20,000. We call this balance the basis in accounting terms. So 20,000 times 19% is what we need to pay as Huququllah, which is $3,800. Now, if our savings is added for another 19 misqal, which is another 22,400, then there's a time to pay another Huququllah. Now, let me give you another example. If we say that the next year, we call year one, our gross income for the year is $40,000. Now, reasonable expenses for the year was $30,000. So we have a net income or savings of $10,000 for the year. Now, from that $10,000, we should pay 19% of this fund, which is $1,900. Now let's say the next year, our gross income, let's say due to recession, was less, was $35,000. And then our reasonable expenses that year was $41,000. Let's assume that we had some sickness in the family, so our expenses were more. So therefore that year we had a loss of $6,000. Obviously, for the second year we don't pay Huququllah. Now let's say the third year our gross income was $43,000, and our reasonable expenses, we decided, and you decide yourself what your reasonable expenses is, $32,000. So your net income, or what you added to your savings for the year, was $11,000. So what you do, you subtract the loss that you had the year before, which was $6,000. So your basis for paying Huququllah becomes $5,000. And from that $5,000, you pay 19% that year, which would be $950, and so on. I hope this brief explanation explains how Huququllah is calculated, and also how important this law is in the Baha'i faith. Thank you for your attention.